The morning sun of the planet Nexera Prime rose slowly over the massive buildings of the Galactic Union Military Academy, and the light touched the silver towers and made them shine like giant swords pointing at the sky. Commander Vexriel stood at the main entrance of the orientation hall, her 4 purple eyes watching the new cadets arrive one by one, and she felt the usual mix of pride and worry that came with every new batch of young soldiers. She was of Worthen, a species known for their wisdom and calm nature, and her blue-scaled skin reflected the morning light as she checked her datapad for the 100th time that morning. 53 different species would join the Academy this year, and each one brought their own strengths and weaknesses to the training program that would turn them into soldiers of the Galactic Union. The Velthari cadets arrived first, their bodies covered in beautiful crystalline armor that grew naturally from their skin, and they walked with the confidence of a species that had never known physical weakness. Behind them came the Grenics, massive creatures that stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored hides that could stop most weapons and muscles that could crush steel beams without effort. The Kaisha slithered in next, their serpentine bodies moving with deadly grace, and their venomous fangs glistened in the light as they hissed greetings to each other. Commander Vexriel checked each species off her list and nodded with satisfaction as the hall filled with the future defenders of galactic peace. Then the doors opened one more time, and a single figure walked in. She was small compared to most of the other cadets, standing only about 1.7 meters tall. With no visible armor or natural weapons of any kind, her skin was soft and brown. Her hair was black and tied back in a simple style, and her eyes were dark and watchful. As she looked around the hall, Elena Vasquez had arrived. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd of cadets like fire through dry grass. A young Velthari named Korvax leaned toward his friend and spoke in a voice that was not quite quiet enough to be private. "Is that a human?" he asked with disbelief clear in his tone. "I thought they were still classified as a developing species," his friend, another Velthari named Drexel, nodded and replied. "They are barely spacefaring, and their homeworld is listed as a death world that they somehow managed to survive on. So this is probably just a political admission to make Earth feel included." Korvax laughed, and his crystalline body made a sound like wind chimes as his amusement shook through him. "Look at her," he said while gesturing toward Elena. "No claws and no fangs and no armor and no venom. So what exactly is she supposed to do in combat except die quickly?" Elena heard them, but she did not react, and instead she simply found an empty seat near the back of the hall and sat down with her back straight and her eyes forward. She had expected this reaction, because Earth had only joined the Galactic Union 30 years ago, and to species who had traveled the stars for thousands of years, humans were still considered primitive newcomers. A massive Grenix named Boral looked down at Elena from his seat 2 rows ahead and snorted with contempt. The soft one should have stayed on her soft planet, he rumbled to his companions. "This academy is for warriors, and not for fragile creatures who need artificial shells just to survive in space." More laughter followed, and Elena remained silent and still. Commander Vexriel watched all of this from her position at the front of the hall, and her 4 eyes narrowed with an expression that might have been concern or might have been anticipation. The orientation ceremony began with speeches from various instructors and administrators, each one welcoming the cadets and explaining the challenges that lay ahead. Then came the standard scanning procedure. A large device at the front of the hall projected a beam that swept over each cadet, reading their biological data and displaying basic information about their species for administrative purposes. The scanner moved through the Velthari and showed their crystalline structure and natural armor rating. It passed over the Grenics and displayed their incredible strength and durability. It analyzed the Kai-Sheth and noted their venom potency and flexible combat style species after species was scanned and categorized, and the cadets watched with boredom as familiar information scrolled across the holographic display. Then the scanner reached Elena Vasquez. The holographic display flickered once and then twice, and then it flashed with an amber warning light. The made commander Dex Ryle stand up straighter. The display showed species, human, Homo sapiens origin, Earth. Sol system warning. Handle with care classification. Persistence predator. Extreme adaptation capable. Adrenaline response active special mode. Deceptive physiology. Do not underestimate. The hall fell silent for a moment as every cadet read the warning. Then Korvax burst out laughing. Handle with care? He said loudly enough for everyone to hear. What does that mean exactly? That we should be careful not to break her by accident. More laughter erupted, and even some of the instructors seemed amused by the apparent contradiction between the small, soft human and the serious warning on the display. But Commander Dex Ryle did not laugh. She had read the classified reports from the contact division, the ones that detailed what humans had done to survive on their death world, and the ones that described what happened when humans were pushed too far. She knew why that warning existed, and it was not to protect the human. Instructor Morth approached the commander quietly and spoke in a low voice that only she could hear. He was a veteran of the Helix conflicts, scarred and experienced, and he had seen things that would break lesser beings. Should we say something to the other cadets? He asked while watching Elena sit calmly in her seat. They are making assumptions that could be dangerous. Commander Dex Ryle considered the question for a long moment, and then shook her head slowly. No, she replied. They need to learn, and there are some lessons that cannot be taught with words. She paused and looked at Elena Vasquez, who sat quietly among aliens who mocked her and dismissed her without a trace of anger or fear on her face. Besides, the commander continued, humans are very good teachers when they want to be, and I suspect this one will teach our cadets something they will never forget. Instructor Morth nodded slowly and returned to his position, but he kept one eye on the human cadet. For the rest of the ceremony, Elena Vasquez sat through the remaining speeches and scanning procedures without speaking a single word. She did not defend herself or challenge her mockers or try to prove anything to anyone. She simply waited because humans were patient creatures who had learned long ago that the best response to those who underestimated them was not words. It was action, and the time for action would come soon enough. The first weeks at the Galactic Union Military Academy were exactly as difficult as Elena Vasquez had expected them to be, not because of the training itself, since she found the academic courses interesting and the physical exercises challenging but manageable. The difficulty came entirely from her fellow cadets. Every morning began the same way, with Elena waking up in her small room in the barracks and preparing herself for another day of whispers and laughter and casual cruelty. The other species had formed their own groups based on shared biology or cultural connections. But Elena remained alone because no one wanted to associate with the soft human who clearly did not belong during physical training sessions. Korvax the Veltari made a show of slowing down whenever he ran past Elena. I do not want to leave you too far behind, he would say with false kindness dripping from his voice, since your little legs cannot possibly keep up with real soldiers. His crystalline body would shimmer with amusement as his friends laughed at his joke, and Elena would say nothing and simply continue running at her steady pace. The combat training was even worse when cadets were paired for hand-to-hand practice. Anyone matched with Elena would immediately tap out and surrender. I do not want to accidentally break your bones, a Kaisheth named Silith hissed during one session. Your skeleton is probably as fragile as dried twigs, and I would hate to end your military career before it begins. The instructor allowed this behavior because even he seemed to believe that Elena was too delicate to participate in real training during one particularly humiliating session. The massive Grenix named Boral stood across from Elena in the practice ring and looked down at her with his small red eyes. "Such thin skin," he rumbled while flexing his armored muscles. "How does your species even survive infancy when you're young or born, so helpless and weak?" Elena met his gaze without flinching and replied, "We are creative," Boral snorted, and the sound echoed through the training hall like a small explosion. "Creative," he repeated with contempt. "Is that why your ancestors needed fire and tools just to hunt for food? Because your bodies are so completely useless for survival." The other cadets laughed loudly, and even some instructors smiled at the joke. Elena said nothing more and simply waited for the session to end, but not everyone in the academy dismissed her so easily from the observation deck above the training floor. Instructor Morris watched every session with careful attention. He was old for his species, and his body carried dozens of scars from battles fought across 100 different worlds. More importantly, he had served alongside humans during the border skirmishes 15 years ago. He had seen what they could do when the situation became desperate. Commander Dex Rail joined him on the observation deck one afternoon and watched as Korvax made another joke at Elena's expense. They have no idea what they are dealing with, Morris said quietly. "Should we intervene before someone gets hurt?" The commander considered his question for a long moment while her 4 eyes tracked Elena's movements across the training floor. "No," she finally replied. "They need to learn this lesson themselves, and I suspect they will learn it very soon." Morris nodded slowly and asked, "You have read the classified files on human physiology?" "I have read everything," Commander Dex Rail confirmed. "Their persistence hunting, and their adrenaline response, and their pain tolerance, and their pack bonding behavior, and all of it." She paused and watched Elena complete a training exercise with perfect form, despite the Kashith instructor clearly giving her the most difficult version. The other cadets see a small, soft creature without natural weapons, the commander continued. They see someone who should not be able to survive in a hostile universe. "And what do you see?" Morith asked. Commander Dex Rail was silent for a moment before answering. "I see a predator," she said simply. "One that has learned to hide its true nature behind a harmless appearance, because that makes the hunt easier." Down on the training floor, Elena finished her exercise and stood calmly while Korvax and his friends made more jokes about her performance. Did not react to their words, and she did not try to defend herself, and she did not show any anger or frustration on her face, but her dark eyes watched everything and remembered everything and calculated everything in the classroom sessions. Elena excelled in ways that confused her. Instructors, her tactical analysis scores were the highest in the cohort, and her strategic planning exercises showed a creativity that surprised everyone who bothered to pay attention during a simulation exercise. She defeated a Velthari opponent by using a strategy that no one had ever seen before. That was not a standard tactic, the instructor said with confusion. "Where did you learn that approach?" "I made it up," Elena replied simply. Humans are good at making things up when the standard approaches do not work. Korvax overheard this exchange and laughed. "Making things up is not the same as being skilled," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Real warriors follow proven methods because they work." Elena looked at him with an expression that he could not quite read and said, "Proven methods work until they do not. And then the species that cannot adapt dies while the species that can adapt survives." She paused and added, "Humans are very good at surviving." Something in her voice made Korvax uncomfortable. Though he could not explain exactly why, he shook off the feeling and walked away with his friends. still laughing about the foolish human who thought she belonged among real soldiers. But that night, when Korvax was alone in his room, he found himself thinking about the warning that had appeared on the scanner. During orientation, handle with care deceptive physiology. Do not underestimate. He dismissed these thoughts and went to sleep, confident that the human was exactly what she appeared to be, soft, weak creature who had no place in the academy and no future as a soldier. He was very wrong. The survival exercise was coming soon, and it would teach Korvax and the other cadets a lesson they would never forget. It would show them exactly why the Galactic Union had put that warning on every human file in their database, and it would make them understand, finally and completely, what the words "handle with care" actually meant. The Academy's survival assessment was legendary among the cadets for its difficulty and danger. Every first-year cohort faced this test at the end of their initial training period. And every year some cadets failed so badly that they were sent home in shame. The rules were simple, but the execution was brutal. Cadets were divided into squads of 5 and dropped onto Nexer 7, a hostile jungle moon covered in dangerous plants and deadly predators. Each squad had 72 hours to reach the extraction point on the other side of the moon. No weapons were provided, and only basic survival kits were allowed. When the squad assignments were announced, Elena Vasquez discovered that the universe had a cruel sense of humor. Her squad included Korvax, the Velthari who had mocked her every day since orientation, Boral the Grenix, who called her fragile and useless, Silith the Kaishith, who refused to spar with her because she might break, and Chirik, a small insectoid Drexy, who had never spoken to Elena but always laughed at the jokes others made about her. Elena looked at her squad members and saw the same disgust in their eyes that she had grown used to seeing. Perfect, Korvax said with sarcasm dripping from his voice. The soft human is on our team, so I suppose we will have to carry her the entire way. Boral rumbled in agreement and said, she will slow us down and probably get injured in the first hour. Silith hissed and added, we should leave her behind when she cannot keep up, since saving her is not worth risking our own success. Elena said nothing because she had learned that words meant nothing to people who had already decided what they believed. The dropships carried the squads to their starting positions, and Elena's team landed in the densest part, a jungle, surrounded by towering trees and thick vegetation that blocked most of the light. Move fast and do not wait for the human, Korvax ordered immediately. She can catch up if she is able. The squad pushed into the jungle at a pace that Korvax was certain Elena could not maintain, but hour after hour she stayed with them, moving through the undergrowth with a quiet efficiency that none of them expected. When Korvax looked back after 12 hours of travel, Elena was still there, not even breathing hard. How are you doing that? He demanded with surprise and annoyance in his voice. Doing what? Elena asked calmly. Keeping up, Korvax replied. Your species has no natural endurance, and your muscles should be exhausted by now. Elena almost smiled and said, humans are persistent predators, which means we evolved to chase prey for hours and days until they collapsed from exhaustion. So walking through a jungle for 12 hours is not especially difficult for us. Korvax did not know how to respond to that information. 30 hours into the exercise, everything started to go wrong. Silith brushed against a plant with beautiful purple leaves and immediately began convulsing as the contact poison entered her bloodstream. Her serpentine body thrashed on the ground, and her squadmates could only watch in horror as her scales turned gray and her breathing became shallow. She is dying. Chirik buzzed with panic in her voice. We need to get her to the extraction point for medical treatment. But they were still 40 kilometers from the extraction point then. Korvax slipped on a wet rock while crossing a ravine and fell hard. Against the stone wall, his crystalline exoskeleton cracked along his left side, and he cried out in pain as the damage spread through his body. "I cannot walk properly," he gasped while clutching his injured side. "The fractures are too severe." Boral tried to push through the dense jungle ahead, but his massive size became a liability as the vegetation grew thicker. Branches and vines caught on his armored body and slowed him down. And when he forced his way through a particularly dense section, he triggered a rock fall that injured his legs. "I am stuck," he bellowed as stones pinned his lower body. "I cannot free myself." Chirik flew up to scout the path ahead, but a sudden storm swept through the jungle and the wind and rain damaged her delicate wings. She crashed back to the ground with her flight capability completely destroyed. "I cannot fly," she said with despair in her voice. "I am useless now." The squad was broken and beaten, and the extraction point was still impossibly far away. Korvax looked around at his injured squad mates and then looked at Elena, who stood among them without a scratch on her soft human skin. "You should go on alone," he said quietly. "Save yourself and leave us here because we are only going to slow you down." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and then she shook her head. "Humans do not leave their pack behind," she said simply. "Now stop talking and let me work." What happened over the next 30 hours would become legendary at the Academy. Elena treated Silith's poisoning using plants she recognized from her survival training, and the antidote she created was crude but effective enough to stabilize the Kaishith. She splinted Korvax's cracked exoskeleton using branches and vines, and then she lifted him onto her back and started walking when Korvax protested that she could not possibly carry him. Elena just said, "Watch me." She organized Boral to clear the path ahead despite his injured legs, because his strength was still useful even when he was hurt. She had Chirik ride on Bural's shoulder and navigate using her excellent memory of the terrain they had already covered, and through it all, Elena kept moving. She did not stop to rest, and she did not slow down when the terrain became difficult, and she did not complain when the weight on her back made every step painful. "How are you still going?" Korvax asked after she had carried him for 10 straight hours. "You should be dead from exhaustion." "Humans do not stop," Elena replied without breaking her stride. "Not until the job is done, because that is what we evolved to do when a predator appeared in their path. A massive beast with razor claws and hungry eyes." The squad prepared to die, but Elena grabbed a branch and lit it on fire using her emergency kit. Then she walked toward the predator and screamed at it with a sound that was more animal than human. The beast looked at the fire and looked at the small creature making such a terrifying noise, and decided that there was easier prey somewhere else. "What was that?" Boral asked when the predator was gone. "Intimidation display," Elena said while her chest heaved from the adrenaline. "Most predators do not expect their prey to fight back. And fire is what made humans the dominant species on our planet." Silith, who was recovering slowly from her poisoning, looked at Elena with new understanding in her eyes. "The scanner said you were a persistence predator," she said weakly. "What does that actually mean?" Elena kept walking as she answered. "It means that humans do not chase prey because we are fast. Since we are not fast at all, and we do not catch prey because we are strong. Since many animals are stronger than us." She paused and adjusted Korvax's weight on her back. "We chase prey because we never stop." She continued. "We walk after animals for hours and days across plains and through forests and over mountains. And we do not give up until they collapse from exhaustion. And then we eat them." The squad fell silent as they finally understood what kind of creature had been walking among Them all along, they reached the extraction point with 6 hours to spare. Elena carried Korvax the last 3 kilometers on her back without stopping. They were the only squad to arrive with all 5 members still alive. Word spread through the academy like wildfire. After the survival exercise ended, the human had saved her entire squad. The soft, fragile creature without claws or fangs or armor had carried a Valkyrie on her back for hours and fought off a predator. With nothing but fire and screaming cadets who had spent weeks mocking Elena Vasquez, now whispered about her in the corridors with something that sounded almost like fear. Korvax lay in the medical bay for 3 days while the doctors repaired his cracked exoskeleton. And during those 3 days, he could not stop thinking about what had happened on Nexer 7. He had been so certain that the human would be useless, and so confident that she would slow them down, and so sure that her species was inferior to his own. He had been completely and totally wrong when he was finally released from medical care. He went directly to the Academy library and began researching humanity with a focus he had never applied to any subject before. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had evolved on a planet that the Galactic Union classified as a death world, a place so hostile that most species would have gone extinct within a few generations. Earth had extreme temperature variations and deadly weather patterns and poisonous plants and dangerous predators and diseases that could kill in hours, and humans had survived all of it. Not just survived, but thrived and spread across every corner of their planet, and eventually reached out into space. They had done this without natural armor or venom or claws or any of the biological advantages that other species relied upon. They had done it with creativity and persistence and an absolute refusal to give up. Korvax read about human endurance hunting and learned that his ancestors on Velthor would have died from exhaustion long before a human gave up the chase. He read about the human adrenaline response and learned that when threatened, their bodies flooded with chemicals that suppressed pain and increased strength and enhanced their reaction time. He read about human pack bonding and learned that they would die for strangers and fight impossible odds for their friends. And he read about human history and learned things that made his crystalline blood run cold. Humans had survived an ice age with nothing but animal skins and fire. They had domesticated wolves, which were apex predators on their world. Through patience and mutual respect, they had built civilizations and invented technologies and reached the stars in less than 10,000 years, and they had fought each other with such ferocity that they had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire species. But then they had chosen not to use those weapons. That last fact kept Korvax awake at night because it meant that humans were not just dangerous, but also capable of restraint. They could have destroyed themselves, but they did not. They could have turned their terrible creativity toward conquest, but instead they had reached for the stars. In Peace Bureau was conducting his own research in another part of the library, and he found information that was equally unsettling. Their pain tolerance is abnormal, he said to Chirrut when they met in the dining hall. The human took injuries during the exercise that should have stopped anyone from walking, but she kept going as if the pain did not matter. Chirrut nodded and added her own findings. It is the adrenaline response, she explained. When humans are threatened, their bodies release chemicals that block pain signals and increase muscle performance and sharpen their senses, and they call this response fight or flight. She paused, and her compound eyes reflected the light in a way that suggested deep thought. But humans usually choose fight. She continued, even when running would be safer, even when the odds are against them, they tend to fight because something in their biology makes them want to stand their ground. Silith had recovered from her poisoning, and she joined the conversation. With her own perspective, the human created medicine from jungle plants. She said with wonder in her hissing voice. She recognized which plants were helpful and which were harmful just by looking at them. and she knew how to combine them into something that saved my life. The group fell silent as they considered everything they had learned. Finally, Korvax said what they were all thinking. We were wrong about her. No one disagreed. Later that day, Korvax found Elena in the medical bay, where she was finally receiving treatment for injuries she had hidden during the entire survival exercise. Her arms were covered in cuts and bruises, and her feet were blistered and raw, and one of her ribs was cracked from carrying his weight for so many hours. Why did you not tell us you were hurt? Korvax asked with genuine confusion in his voice. Lana shrugged and winced slightly at the movement. Would you have believed me if I said it did not matter? She replied, Pain is just information, and you can choose what to do with it. So I chose to keep going until everyone was safe. Korvax stared at her for a long moment, and then he said something he had never expected to say. I'm sorry. Elena looked at him with surprise, because apologizing was not common among Volthari. Sorry for what? Exactly. She asked. For mocking you, Korvax said. For underestimating you, and for treating you like you were less than the rest of us. Because I was wrong, and I know that now. He paused and then continued. The warning on the scanner said to handle you with care, and I thought it meant you were fragile. But that is not what it means at all. Elena met his crystalline eyes with her soft brown ones. No, it is not. She agreed. It means you are dangerous, Korvax said slowly. It means that despite your soft skin and your lack of natural weapons, you are one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Elena considered his words, and then she nodded. Every human is a survival machine built by millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill us every single day, she said. We did not become the dominant species because we were the strongest or the fastest. Since we were neither of those things, she paused and looked at her bandaged hands. We became dominant because we refused to die. She continued. We kept going when other species would have given up, and we adapted when other species would have failed, and we never stopped fighting for our survival. She looked back at Korvax with an expression that was both fierce and kind. But we are also capable of great loyalty and compassion and sacrifice. She added, that warning exists because you need to understand both sides of what we are. She reached out her hand, the soft, vulnerable, impossibly resilient human hand, and offered it to Korvax. Push a human, and we will push back, she said. But earn our trust, and we will carry you through hell. Korvax looked at her hand and remembered how that hand had lifted him onto her back and carried him for hours without complaint. He took it, and in that moment something changed between them. Something that would grow into a bond that neither of them expected. They were no longer just classmates. They were a pack. 3 years passed at the Galactic Union Military Academy, and everything changed. The cadet who had once been mocked and dismissed had become a legend among her peers. And Elena Vasquez was now known throughout the academy as someone you wanted on your side when things went wrong. Squad from the survival exercise had never separated. After that day on Nexer 7, Korvax and Boral and Silith and Chirik had requested to remain with Elena for every training exercise, and every simulation and every field mission. They had learned something that the rest of the galaxy was slowly beginning to understand about humans. Once you earned their loyalty, they would never abandon you. The graduation ceremony took place on a warm afternoon in the main courtyard of the academy, with representatives from dozens of species watching as the cadets received their commissions as officers of the Galactic Union military commander. Dashriel stood at the front of the assembled crowd, her 4 purple eyes watching the young soldiers she had trained for 3 years. She felt pride in all of them, but she felt something special when she looked at the human who stood at the center of the front row. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, first in her class in tactical operations, the cadet who had arrived alone and mocked by everyone, had graduated at the top of her cohort. surrounded by friends who would follow her. Anywhere an admiral from the high command stood beside Commander HFY, and reviewed the graduation records with interest. The human earned highest marks in every survival and combat scenario, he observed, while reading from his datapad. And yet her instructors consistently note her compassion and protective instincts as her defining traits. He looked up at the commander with curiosity in his large silver eyes. That seems like a contradiction, he said. How can someone be both the most dangerous and the most compassionate at the same time? Commander HFY smiled, an expression that most species found unsettling on her scaled Vorthan face. That is the thing about humans, she replied. They are not just one thing, and they are not even two things, because they are everything all at once. She gestured toward Elena, who was embracing Korvax and Boral and Silith and Chirik with obvious affection. They are predator and protector. The commander continued, warrior and healer, fragile and unbreakable. And they will die for strangers while fighting like demons for their friends. The admiral considered her words and then asked the question that many species had been asking since humanity first reached the stars. Are they dangerous to the Union? He inquired, Commander. HFY shook her head slowly. They are dangerous to anyone who threatens the Union, she clarified. But to those who stand beside them, they are the most loyal allies you could ever hope to find. She paused and watched as more humans joined the celebration in the courtyard. Since there were more human cadets at the academy, each year as Earth became more integrated into galactic society, we spent thousands of years believing that the most important qualities for a species were strength and speed, and natural weapons, she said thoughtfully. We looked for armor and claws in them because those were the things that made species powerful. She turned to face the admiral directly. But humans taught us something different. She continued. They showed us that persistence is more valuable than speed, that creativity can overcome strength, and that the willingness to never give up is the most dangerous quality of all. The admiral nodded slowly as he absorbed her words. Handle with care, he murmured while looking at the humans celebrating in the courtyard. Yes. Commander HFY agreed, but not because they will break, since they are far more durable than they appear. Elena looked up at that moment and caught the commander's gaze across the crowded courtyard. The human officer gave a small nod of respect and gratitude, acknowledging everything that HFY had done to support her during the difficult early months at the academy. The commander returned the nod and felt something warm in her chest that she recognized as pride. Handle them with care because once you truly understand what they are, she said softly to the admiral. Once you see past the soft skin and the lack of natural weapons and the apparent vulnerability, she watched Elena return to her celebration with her squad. Her pack, her family of choice from a dozen different species. You will realize that they are the ones who will handle you with care, the commander finished. And that kind of loyalty is worth more than all the armor and weapons in the galaxy. The graduation ceremony concluded and the new officers dispersed to their first assignments across the Galactic Union. Elena Vasquez and her squad were assigned to a patrol ship on the border territories, a posting that would test everything they had learned as they boarded the transport that would take them to their new home. Korvax walked beside Elena and remembered the day he had first seen her in the orientation hall. He remembered laughing at the warning on the scanner and mocking her for being soft and weak. He remembered how wrong he had been. I never thanked you properly, he said as they found seats on the transport. For carrying me on Nexus 7, and for not leaving us behind when you could have saved yourself. Elena looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn on that first day. But now Korvax could see the warmth and strength behind it. You are my pack now, she said simply. Humans protect their pack, always, no matter what it cost us. She paused and smiled. A genuine human smile that showed her teeth in a way that should have been threatening, but somehow was not. Besides, she added, "You would do the same for me now, and that is what matters." Korvax thought about her words and realized that she was right. He would carry her if she needed it. He would fight for her if she was threatened. He would never leave her behind, because that was what Pac did. The transport lifted off and carried them toward their future. A future where humans in Velthari and Grenix and Kaishith and Drexy would serve side by side in the cold depths of space. The Galactic Union had learned an ancient truth, the most dangerous. Creatures were not always the ones with claws and fangs and armor. Sometimes they were the ones who smiled and offered a hand and simply refused to quit. Handle with care indeed, but also handle with respect, because the soft, small humans from the death world called Earth had earned that respect through 3 years of persistence and loyalty and quiet strength. And they would continue to earn it for as long as the stars kept burning.